What's up, guys? Thanks as always for supporting the show. It would mean a lot to me if you would take a second to scroll down and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any more of our videos. Also, make sure you follow us all over social media so you don't miss any of our content or show announcements. All right, let's get to our mailbag. First question. A lot of good ones from you guys today. Thank you for participating. As always, did the Knicks sacrifice their identity? Gritty offensive rebounds, Tibbs guys, to appear better on paper? This is a really interesting question. There's no doubt that their identity will look a little bit different this year. I think that goes without saying. I still think a good chunk of last year's identity is there, though, right? With Josh Hart, OG Anunoby, Deuce McBride is a guy that just kind of brings that same mentality. Jalen Brunson is a tough-minded guy. Mitchell Robinson, when he's healthy. I think Mikal Bridges kind of fits that mold and will add to that this season. But the reality is they had a certain ceiling last year. Too much was on Brunson's plate offensively to actually win 4 playoff rounds. I didn't think that they had enough aggregate talent to really capitalize on the advantages that Jalen Brunson was creating as well. They capitalized on attention devoted to Brunson on the offensive glass as guys would break free and crash as they were in rotation. But I actually think they have enough talent this year to have a little bit more of a driving kick look, a little bit more of a advantage extending look, meaning when Jalen Brunson draws a heavier preponderance of the defense in his direction, guys that can drive closeouts and turn good shots into great shots. I think that was something that was missing last year. And then obviously just the true 5-out spacing that they can accomplish with Karl-Anthony Towns at center. It's a look that they just didn't have in the past. So yeah, look at it this way. Anytime you make substantial roster changes, there's a certain amount of risk. And yes, there's a version of this where this team just isn't as tough as they are last year and they underachieve and it doesn't go well, right? But last year's team had no championship ceiling. This team actually does. And so it's about the risk. Anytime you want a real reward in life, you've got to put yourself out there and take some risk. That's what the Knicks are doing. Yes, it could go south, but there's also a version of this that works out. Do you think Dalton Knecht will eventually play his way into the starting lineup for the Lakers? A lot of folks thought he could eventually take Rui's spot, although I disagree. I would like to hear what you have to say about it. Definitely not this year. With the way that this Lakers starting lineup is constructed, they really need Rui's size, especially on the defensive glass with LeBron and just some of his inconsistent defensive engagement at this phase in his career. It's also part of them just kind of leaning into offense. But maybe a future version of the Lakers, you could see that. And this is where it gets interesting because let's say we think about life post LeBron. So you have your foundational pieces, right? You have, I think we see the Lakers would see their 3-4 years from now backcourt as Austin Reeves and Max Christie. I think that goes without saying. And I think that's a nice natural fit, right? Skill guard, athlete guard, primarily defends and attacks closeouts, right? Then you have Anthony Davis, but then there's this 2-3 or the 3-4 spot that you're looking at, right? And the obvious choice is Rui slots down to the 4 when LeBron is gone, and then you put in Dalton Knecht at the 3. This is where it gets tricky, though. That has one good defensive athlete at the 2 in Max Christie, right? I don't think Dalton could start at the 3 for an NBA team unless the 4-man and the 2-man and the 5-man were all excellent defensive players. Do I think Dalton Knecht will eventually become somebody that is functional on defense? We'll see. It's definitely, he has the athleticism too. It's just a question of whether or not he puts in the work and picks up the instincts and commitment to attention to detail to actually make that happen. But just in terms of who he, in terms of his natural abilities as a basketball player, I don't think you could start him alongside another weak defensive forward like Rui Hachimura. So in terms of the long-term goals for the Lakers, if you're looking at it as Austin, Max, Dalton, that 4-man next to AD is going to have to be another big, strong athlete who is an excellent defensive rebounder, an excellent defensive player. And so more likely than not, I almost see Dalton Knecht at this kind of point in his career, because this is the other part of it too. You better be damn good on offense if you are starting for an NBA team and you're a mediocre to below average defender. So so much of this is maybe Dalton Knecht never really has starting potential. He's more of a 6th man type of guy, right? Then maybe Rui is the 4 and they look for a long-term option at the 3. But in terms of future version of the Lakers, do I think Dalton Knecht could eventually become a starter? Sure, but I see basically a 0% chance of that happening this year. He might get a spot start here or there because of injuries, but I don't see that being part of the vision for this particular season. If the Thunder get a lottery pick from the Clippers this year, what should the Thunder do with the pick? It's an easy decision. You hang on to it and you see if you can get Cooper Flagg. This is a team, like if you're looking at the build, the one guy they're missing is a legitimate 4-man to flank Chet. They went with a different direction this summer, opting for a look with Chet at the 4 next to a center, which maybe that ends up being what this looks like in the long run anyway. But if you have an opportunity to get Cooper Flagg, you wait to see if you can get Cooper Flagg. Now, if you can't get Cooper Flagg and you can't get any of these guys at the top end of the draft that everyone's kind of keyed in on, then I would start looking at potentially trading that pick and looking for that forward more through the trade market, because there's a timeline thing starting to take shape here as you look at the age of these guys. They're actually starting to enter into legitimate championship contention, and continuing to develop prospects for the future may not be the best path. The other thing they can do, this is something that I wouldn't be surprised if we see more teams do as we enter into this kind of next phase of the CBA, with some of the limitations surrounding the aprons. But we might actually see a team like Oklahoma City let guys go when they need to get paid. Because like if you think about it from the standpoint of the payroll, if you got to pay 3 max guys, and let's say that's Chet, J-Dub, and Shea, then you can't afford to have expensive role players around them. And so maybe it's one of those things where you use a higher draft pick that typically would be used on a player that has upside long-term on more of a guy that is not as heavy on the upside, but is ready to go right away, and actually try to target discount rotation pieces through the draft. I think that's something that you might see a team like Oklahoma City look to do as well. Not related to preseason, but you recently said LeBron's argument for being the GOAT is his longevity, and that MJ has a better peak for sure. How are you so sure about MJ's peaking higher? If your argument is only 6 and 8 years, that is more of a team stat. That's kind of the point. Like, MJ's peak is clearly more dominant in terms of the actual accomplishments of him and his basketball team. The best individual basketball player that I have ever personally watched was 2018 LeBron. He was basically like Luka Doncic as a surgical half-court shot creator who could pass every single read, who could make every single shot from every single spot on the floor. But he was also one of the best athletes in the league who brought a ton of downhill rim pressure, which is something that Luka doesn't bring. And at that phase of his career, LeBron was still able to leverage himself as a defensive player at a level near the top guys in the league when he needed to. That was the best basketball player that I've ever seen personally. But that team lost in the finals in large part because the team had a lot of limitations, and there's a lot of subjectivity there. It's hard to argue with 6 championships in 8 years with respect to what was going on in the world of basketball at that point in time. You're not going to be able to argue LeBron's peak beyond the realm of subjectivity. So like, that's the thing. Yeah, I'm also a big believer that basketball players are always getting better. Like 2018, LeBron's the best basketball player I've ever seen. I have a feeling I'm going to see a player that I think is better at some point in the next 10 years. But it's not going to be because LeBron wasn't the best player in the league at the time. It's going to be because basketball players keep getting better. Just look at how much better the shooting is now compared to where it was. Guys are better at shooting further away from the basket. Guys are better at shooting off of more complicated dribble combinations. As a league, we're getting so much better at advanced passing reads, advanced pick and roll shot creation. We're getting better defensively as well. Like, the league is just getting better. Basketball players are getting better. And so, yeah, I tend to think that the 6'9", super versatile point forward who could dribble, pass, and shoot better than most players in the league was better than the 6'6" scoring guard who was also one of the best perimeter defenders in the league. Like, MJ in his era was far and away the best. And all players have gotten better, and LeBron is the best of a better group of players, and Wemby will probably be the best of an even better group of players, right? And that's just kind of how I see. It's not perfectly linear, but generally the league is advancing and players are getting better. What percentage of the league matches up well enough with Boston to make us believe anybody but Boston can win? And do you think it makes the season less enjoyable if you know that there's no team that can? Keep up the good work. Really enjoy your content. Thank you for supporting the show. I did feel that way about the KD Steph Warriors. I legitimately didn't think anybody could beat them. Even when they would lose, I thought it was mostly about like just kind of like playing down to their competition. This is something I've said many times on the show, but even if Chris Paul didn't get hurt in the 2018 conference final series against the Rockets, I still think the Warriors win that series. Yes, they went up 3-2, and obviously, Chris Paul getting hurt helped things, but let's just put it on a real basic level. Does Golden State go home and get Game 6 at home? I think they do, even if Chris Paul plays. Then there's a Game 7, and yes, it's in Houston. But who are you taking? Are you taking KD, Steph, Draymond, Clay, and Andre Iguodala? Or are you taking those Rockets dudes? I'm taking the Golden State Warriors dudes. So like, I didn't think anybody could beat that team. It was basically like this Boston Celtics team, except for instead of Tatum and Brown, it was KD and Steph, the second and third best players in the league. That to me is the greatest basketball team ever assembled, and it's not particularly close. Boston, to me, is a special basketball team with regard to recent NBA history, but they just don't quite have that like otherworldly top end talent that like nobody can mess with. And that to me makes them at least beatable, even though they're the best team in the league. That I think keeps this season very interesting. As I mentioned, I have a hard time discussing, I talked about this in the actual Celtics segment, I have a hard time really conceptualizing an Eastern Conference team to beat them just from a basketball perspective. But Oklahoma City and Denver are two teams out west that I think could present Boston with some real issues. Particularly Boston can't guard Jokic. We've seen that just too many times over the last few years. And then Oklahoma City it can put together 5-man lineups with real two-way athletes on at all 5 positions, which is something that Boston can do, and part of what makes Boston so difficult to play, right? I would still pick Boston in both of those matchups now because Denver's declined a little bit. I think Boston's better, and then I think Boston is more experienced than Oklahoma City. However, there are teams that have puncher's chances to beat Boston. I do think they are a risk for an upset, and that is something that I think makes them a more legitimate like kind of like parity concept favorite compared to teams like Golden State. You know, an interesting way to look at it would be like, would I take Boston or the field? If I had to pick the KD Steph Warriors or the field, I would take the KD Steph Warriors every single time. I just there's no version of that where I think one of those other teams are going to win. If I had to choose between Boston and the field this year, it'd be more of a toss up for me. And even though I do think Boston is demonstrably the favorite, it's more of a toss-up for me in terms of them or the field. And I think that's kind of the big difference in terms of, I think that's the big difference in terms of the parity and just how much people can kind of look forward to Boston potentially getting upset. On a real basic level, I'm pulling up the stat right now. When I remember when the KD Steph Warriors were assembled, after they won in 2017, I can't remember the exact odds, but they were negative odds to win the title before the season in that 2018 year. For good reason. They had won 15 straight playoff games in the previous year. So like for good reason, I want to say they were like minus 170 to win the title, meaning you'd have to bet $170 before the season started to win 100 if Golden State won the title. I can't remember exactly what the number was, but they had negative odds to win the title. This year, Boston's plus 310. So if you bet $100 on the Celtics to win the title right now, you'd win $310. For the record, I think that's a great bet because I think that it's probably a little closer to 50-50 than they're letting on. So I think that's a bet that would be worth looking at. But I do think that there's a lot more parity in the league right now than there was at that point in time. Julian Strawther has had an amazing summer in preseason. How does him excelling affect Denver's outlook? So far on 26 jump shot attempts this preseason, he's getting 1.5 points per jump shot. The only real difference, though, is like he's hitting all of his catch and shoot attempts, but he's struggling off the dribble and he's struggling creating shots off the dribble. And I think that is ultimately the thing that is going to be what makes him a legitimate secondary shot creator or a guy that they could potentially slot in for Christian Braun to increase the productivity of the starting lineup. And so and then obviously we got to see how he develops defensively as he picks up more high leverage assignments and bigger minute loads, right? But obviously that potential's there. But everything with these young guys with Denver is up in the air at this point, and I really need to see some regular season basketball before we start making those stances. Thoughts on the Warriors and how they will do this season? Is the dynasty officially over? I would never say it's over. I do think that there's some similarities to the 2021 offseason where they kind of brought in some more functional role players that will immediately make them better. I do think the Warriors will be better than last year. I think Kyle Anderson, Buddy Hield, and DeAnthony Melton are all shoe-in fits. Young players get a little bit better. I think Steph's going to have a bounce-back season from where he was at the tail end of last year, right? The big difference between this right now and what the 2022 Warriors became off the back of that 2021 offseason was you could make the case that Steph was the best basketball player alive at that point in time. In 2021, before they made those offseason additions, he was barbecuing the entire league. He's coming off a pretty substantial slump to end last season. I do think he'll be better. I still think he's a top 10-ish player in the NBA, but Steph is not on the true top-tier superstar tier anymore. That's the main reason that I can't see them going over the top into real championship contention this year. To put it simply, it's Steph and a bunch of role players. And if it's Steph and a bunch of role players and he's not the very best player in the league, he's not going to beat other teams around the league that have more star talent and better role players. And so, yeah, I think the Warriors are good. I think they're feisty. I think they're going to be better than last year. I think they'll be in that, somewhere in that 6 to 8 range, probably, maybe 6 to 10, depending on how their health goes. But yeah, I don't see championship contention from this team unless they hit on a trade during the season. Even though the Mavs made the finals last year, do you see them as contenders next year with the players they've picked up and Kyrie turning 33? I have them as the best of the teams in that second tier. So I have my top 4 teams, right? I have Boston, Denver, Oklahoma City, and New York. Those are my true top tier championship contenders that I think all should feel really good about their chances. Then there's a small gap, and then from 5 to 11, I've got 7 teams that I classify as if things go right contenders. Dallas is, for me, in the top of that tier. That's where I had them last year going into the playoffs. If you remember last year going into the playoffs, I had Boston and Denver, and then a gap, and then I had Dallas at number 3 as the best of the second tier championship contenders. Even going into the finals, I never saw them as a true top tier contender. Those of you guys who watched my NBA Finals preview will remember me saying I didn't just pick Boston. I specifically said I expected Boston to kick their ass. I said they'd win multiple games in blowout fashion. They ended up winning. I think they led by 20 plus in 3 of their 4 wins. They led by like 21, 26, and something. Like, it was crazy. They kicked their ass. So like I like Dallas. I think they're a really good team. I think they're the best of the second tier contenders. But to me, there's a firepower difference between them and the teams that are in that top tier. Do you think Moses Moody will have a breakout season this year or be subjected to his typical limitations imposed by Steve Kerr? The thing is that Steve Kerr has always liked playing guards that he trusts to run his system. And so guys like DeAnthony Melton and Buddy Hield are just going to get a lot of minutes. And I think that just directly interferes with Moses Moody and his opportunities. He'll get his opportunities, but inevitably this is going to end in a consolidation trade. They have 13 guys that could realistically play in the rotation, and that's just not good for anybody. It's not good for their goals for the season because it's a waste of talent. It's an inefficient way to use talent. And it's not good for the talent development because guys aren't getting the reps that they need. So inevitably there will be a consolidation trade. Maybe it includes Moody, but if it doesn't, then that'll be where he gets his opportunity. Let's see. Thoughts on a Brandon Ingram for Michael Porter Jr. trade mid-season. Denver gets a consistent playmaker who doesn't fit perfectly, but supports Jamal Murray staying healthy with less responsibility. New Orleans gets a confident three-point shooter for Zion with very questionable consistency, but a great fit. This is an interesting idea because the idea would be, okay, if Jamal Murray struggles, then you would need somebody that can help run perimeter action and be a shot maker for Denver. Brandon fits that role pretty well, right? For the Pelicans, so much of their drive and kick offense is going to be initiated by Zion and DeJounte Murray. So having a guy that's more of a catch and shoot off-ball player, maybe it's a more seamless fit, although Brandon Ingram has looked sharp to start the year. So like, here's my thing. It's interesting, but it's high risk. So I'd want to see how Jamal Murray looks first. If Jamal Murray comes out and he looks like Jamal Murray after, 30 games or so, then don't fuck with it. Jamal, Jokic, Aaron Gordon, Michael Porter Jr., they won a title and got close to winning a title, closer than people think, last year. So don't mess with it. But if you get out into the season and 30, 40 games in, Jamal Murray looks like he did last year in the playoffs, then it's one of those things where you have to start looking at trying to capitalize on Nikola Jokic's title window here. And in that case, you have to take on a little bit more risk. But don't take on risk if you don't have to. Let's wait and see how Jamal Murray looks. Why are you so strong-fisted on Jokic and the Nuggets title odds? Why is it always they were up 20 in Game 7 and not they blew the lead to the better performing team? It wouldn't be the first time the best in the world wouldn't have a big chance to win the chip. We've seen Bron and Steph in 34. Here's why I'm still bullish on the Nuggets. They won the title the year before last, and then last year they were a couple of minutes away from making the conference finals. You'd be foolish to write those guys off. I don't know how else to put it. Do the Suns have a legit chance to come out the West? Would they have to upgrade over Nurkic? It's hard to say I mean, Ryan Dunn developing, as Sam Vecini was saying yesterday, into a legit 3-and-D weapon for them would be huge because he's just one of the most dynamic athletes that was in that draft class. My thing with the Suns is it goes beyond just Nurkic. As a roster, they're not very physically imposing. And just in the playoffs, especially with the way the rules have changed, everything is just so physical, and it's so much about grabbing and holding and winning these like rock fights. And I don't think Phoenix is set up well to win rock fights. That said, everybody in that tier has issues, from Dallas, Minnesota, Philly, Lakers, Bucks, Suns. All those teams have issues. And so all it takes is a couple favorable matchups here and there, a young guy popping like Ryan Dunn, hitting on a key trade, one of the top tier teams gets upset. Something like that could open up that door, and then they could shoot through that gap. All right, one last question, then we're done for the day. Is there anywhere that screams Zach LaVine trade? Doesn't feel it to me. And when they traded for Giddey, do you think they knew Lonzo was coming back? Seems very redundant to have so many ball-dominant guys, incredibly poor team building, in my opinion. The thing with the LaVine piece is he's just hard to trade because of how big his salary is. Like, on a very basic level, there are a lot of teams out there that I think are looking at the situation going like, man, if we could bring Zach in here, this would actually be really good for us. But on the flip side, it's like, yeah, but we would have to send out $50 million worth of salary. As soon as we send out, that could be 3 really high-level role players. And there are just too many examples in NBA history, most recently the Russell Westbrook trade, where it's like, okay, you bring in this guy, but it's the Russell Westbrook trade was not what killed Russell Westbrook is not what killed the Lakers. The Russell Westbrook trade killed the Lakers because they gave up KCP, Kyle Kuzma, and in the ensuing salary crunch, lost Alex Caruso. So, like, that's the real issue, is it's just hard for them to get rid of Zach LaVine. But the best thing he can do to start the season is just, you got to feed him and help him bump up his numbers and see if he can't drive up his value so that you can make a deal. As far as Giddey goes, to me, Lonzo's more of like a connective point guard, throwing kick-ahead passes and being a connective passer. He's not a guy that I like to run a ton of action. So I don't think that necessarily clashes with Giddey. And you got to give Giddey a good hard look, because you just traded Alex Caruso for him instead of for draft compensation. And so you damn well better have a plan to see if Josh Giddey can do anything. One last thing before we get out of here. Actually, I wanted to quickly hit. I just had a quick thought on the Clippers. This Kawhi Leonard thing. So Kawhi Leonard's going to miss the start of the season. A lot of people are talking shit about the Clippers. And here's the thing. It's really easy to make those types of opinions known in retrospect. So, for instance, yeah, the Clippers basically set Oklahoma City up for success. All this draft compensation, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, 4th best player in the league, obviously getting off of Paul George. All of this just spoon-fed Oklahoma City a contender, right? But we can't operate in 2024 with what we know now and pretend like we would have made a different decision back then. In 2020, remember where you were when the Kawhi news came down. I remember I was in Mexico with some friends. I remember it was late at night, getting the tweets coming through from Wojnarowski, and I'm like, oh my God, they got Paul George and Kawhi Leonard on this team that already has all of these good role players. Overnight, they became the championship favorite. At various points over the last 4 years, they looked like the best team in the league. In 2020, at various points in the regular season. In 2021, before Kawhi Leonard got hurt. In that playoff run, right? Last year, in the middle of the regular season, they were playing better basketball than Boston over the middle third of the season. They looked like the best team in the league. So, like, as I talked about earlier, you've got to take risks to win the championship. And there was a big risk there taken by the Clippers. It was the right risk. They had legitimate chances to win. It didn't work out. And, like, yeah, on the tail, every time you give up young players, it's like with the Pelicans and the Lakers. Yeah, like, they happen to win a title, so it all gets talked about differently. If the Lakers did not win the championship in 2020, can you imagine how different that deal would be talked about with everything the Pelicans got out of it? Like, if you have to give up young, talented players and draft compensation, there's a good chance that those guys are going to turn into good basketball players, and it's going to affect the outlook of your of that deal. but you've got to be aggressive to give yourself a chance to win the championship. It's really unfortunate what happened to Kawhi Leonard. It's really unfortunate what happened to the Clippers, but every one of us would have done the exact same thing. Put yourself in those shoes. Summer of 2019. Hey, all you got to do is give up Shea, who's a good young player, has potential to be really great, but not yet. And bunch of draft compensation, you get Paul George and Kawhi Leonard and really good role players. You're overnight championship favorite. Yes or no? Every damn one of us is saying yes. Every damn one of us. Stop pretending you wouldn't. So like that's where it gets silly in retrospect to talk about it that way.